Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Garrett McQueen. I'm the Director of Artist Equity for the American Composers Orchestra, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's professional development session titled Put Me On, Commissions and Consortia, featuring Corey Field and Melissa Nahn. The music that we were all enjoying there was an excerpt from Floodplain by Ellen Reed, as performed in that recording by the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. I selected it today because that piece of music in itself is a prime example of the power and utility of understanding commissions and consortia. Ellen Reed's Floodplain was the result of a commission consortium which included the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, the RTE National Symphony Orchestra of Ireland, and the American Composers Orchestra. If you'd like to hear that piece of music in its entirety, I'd encourage you to join us at Carnegie Hall next week or the week after next on the week of the 13th for the New York premiere of Floodplain at our Modern Yesterdays concert. You can learn more about that upcoming performance at americancomposers.org. But today's session is a part of ACO's Earshot, which is the nation's first systemic program for building relationships between orchestras and composers. Through orchestral readings, collaboratory fellowships, consortium commissions, and professional development, Earshot expands the definition of American orchestral music to ensure a vibrant and inclusive future. Earshot is a program of American Composers Orchestra completed in partnership with the American Composers Forum, the League of American Orchestras, and New Music USA. Composers for our Earshot readings are selected through an open call with no fee or age limit. We're delighted to welcome many of them here today. All of our Earshot professional development sessions are open to the public, and you can find the full schedule and list of topics at americancomposers.org. Just a few housekeeping notes. I'm sure that you may have many questions or comments that come to mind over the course of this presentation, so if you wouldn't mind offering those using the Q&A function here on Zoom as we go along, we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. If you're viewing on YouTube or Facebook, I'll also be keeping an eye on those chat windows as well, so be sure to participate and engage if you are so moved. If you'd like to come on screen to ask your question at the end of today's presentation, feel free to use the hand raise function here on Zoom, and we'll bring as many people to the screen as we can and as time allows. As a follow-up to this session, we will be offering materials for you to review, which will be available at a later date, so be sure to check back and stay tuned for those. I will also be offering a survey in the chat at the conclusion of today's presentation, so if you wouldn't mind clicking that link when it appears and offering your feedback, it would be much appreciated. And with that, I'd like to pass things over to Melissa Nahn, our President and CEO, who will be a part of the facilitation of today's session. Hello, Melissa. Good afternoon.
Hello, Garrett. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And Corey, welcome, welcome, welcome. It is a delight to have you here today. So just a little bit of an introduction as to who Corey is. He practices entertainment, media, and copyright trademark law, representing clients in all areas of the entertainment industry. Before becoming an attorney, he was an executive in the international music publishing business, and he is also a wonderful composer himself. If you are interested in learning more about today's topic, please check out his book, Entertainment Law, Fundamentals and Practice. We are popping a link in the chat for you, and you can also visit him online at coreyfieldlaw.com. Corey, welcome.
Thank you. Am I audible?
You sound fabulous.
Wonderful. I really need to start by thanking Garrett and Melissa, the whole ACO team, American Composers Forum, New Music USA. You know, events like this boggle my mind. It's like the ACO has just blossomed into this incredible thing. They're like performing new music and commissioning and doing reading sessions and doing sessions like this. I mean, my God, there never used to be something quite this amazing for emerging composers in this country. And I just want to say how honored I am to be a tiny part of this, and how smart all the participants are to tune in today and take advantage of this. So thank you for including me. Commissions and a lawyer giving a commission presentation might sound very foreboding, very technical. You know, it's like, oh my God, this probably is going to be a challenge. But I would like to stick with the reality and the wonderfulness that getting your work created is what it's all about. And how wonderful is it when someone actually says, we'd like you to create something? Whether they pay you a little or a lot is another part of that. But commissions are the lifeblood of creating new music. And if we really think about it, so many of the great works were in some way commissioned by somebody. You know, commissioning is patronage. Think of the Medicis in Renaissance Florence. They just decided that Michelangelo was worth giving money to, or whoever else. And in music, same thing, as some of you may have seen in libraries. Old editions of classic works often have these incredibly involved and flowery dedications, usually to someone with a title, a prince or somebody, and that's really how music has established this tradition over centuries. And so the topic we're talking about today is really part of the long-term, centuries-long lifeblood of what it means to create a work. And I'd like you to keep that in mind, because you know, I'm an attorney and I often deal with all the nitty-gritty, and today we're going to do a little legal nitty-gritty. But the whole point is, how exciting is it? How wonderful is it that this is in service to creating a new piece of music? So thank you all for being here, and please keep the music in mind as we talk about the law. So I have a PowerPoint, which is going to be basically a sort of a, you know, a guide for the conversation to keep us on track, to keep me on time. And I'm going to bring it up on the screen in a moment. I'm going to share screen, select the PowerPoint, hit share, hit the full screen thing. So in due course here, let's see, I'm screen sharing and I should get, there we go. You should be seeing a lot of green, and you should be seeing, okay, very good. It's a screen that has, you know, says where we are and what we're doing, not too exciting. Commissions overview. So I'm going to start the presentation now. If you have any questions, please make a note, put them into the Q&A. I'm going to attempt to make sure I have 10 or 15 minutes left for questions. And, you know, this is your chance, free lawyer, go for it. You know, Zoom is not ideal, but we're going to make the best of it. And so there's going to be an introduction. I'm going to talk about the key aspects of a commission agreement. Along the way, we're going to stop and look at some actual legal documents. We'll then talk about a consortium type of commission. And then very importantly, and I realize this is not an opera event, but we are going to talk about collaboration in commissions, typically composer and librettist. Not always. There are some commissions where a composer might collaborate with a soloist, perhaps in some way. We're going to look at sample agreements, and we'll keep time for the questions and answers. I mentioned a minute ago, you know, flowery dedications on scores and works over the centuries. This is without question my favorite one, and it really illustrates the point. The first part of this dedication is really what music is about. It says, this symphony was composed for the glory of God. Now that's Stravinsky's own way of saying, this is my deepest communication of my soul to you in music. It's such a beautiful comment. And of course, it's the Symphony of Songs, which is a religious piece. And so in that context, we're going full God in terms of this example. It's not always the case, of course. And then the rest of it is like Stravinsky phoned his lawyer and said, what should I say next? And his lawyer says, okay, Igor, next I want you to write the following words and dedicate it to the Boston Symphony Orchestra on the occasion of its 50th anniversary. That's the commission part, okay? And this wonderful dedication is really the whole story. This is someone saying, I'm doing this for the glory of beautiful music and for the 50th anniversary of the person who commissioned it. So there it is. That says it all. This illustrates it better than I can. So why do commissions happen? Look at what we heard a minute ago. The ACO is involved in a consortium commission for that really gorgeous Ellen Reed piece that I was listening to. Thank you, Garrett, by the way, for saying what it was, because I was going to start by saying, what is that? It sounds so good, and the recording so great, the sound and the performance. So why do commissions happen? You know, they're at every possible level. They could be, you know, a musician friend of a composer saying, oh, I've got a recital and I'd like you to include something. And, you know, that's it. That's the entire commission agreement right there. It can be various levels of, you know, performing groups, various levels of money, but somehow we are in a world where people in the arts believe in the importance of composers and new music, and they actively seek it out. And it's a great thing, you know, as far as why. I mean, we've got a lot of participants today. Many of you may have had a commission or have talked to people about writing a piece for somebody. And there's probably as many reasons as it happens as we could think of. Sometimes it's almost an institutional thing. Like there are some orchestras that will commission a new work or two or three every year, perhaps, or every other year, whatever their preferences are. And then the next, you know, sort of thing to consider is, what is the overall plan? And by the way, why a commission? Very often it is a special event. The Stravinsky example was very good. It was the 50th anniversary of the Boston Symphony. And so they said, let's commission some new works. Anniversaries are very common reasons. A soloist that needs a concerto is a common reason. I mean, many of you are musicians. You just know from your own life experience all the reasons. And the overall plan, that includes things like when the performance will take place. Is it part of a special event of some kind? Might there be other organizations involved in it? That's what we call a consortium often. And these conversations often happen before there's any approach to the composer. We'll get to that in a moment. Underlying rights. This is often more of an opera topic. You know, what is the subject? Like I represent some opera companies that actually proactively, they go out looking for topics that they think would make a great opera, and then they approach the creative people, which is kind of in reverse of what it might be. Some creative teams will, they'll have their own ideas about what to make into an opera, for example. The ask. This is what I meant when I said a moment ago that most of this, in my own experience, commissions are often sprung upon a composer, at least at a fairly high level of orchestras planning. They come up with this plan and they think of just the right composer. And depending on the sort of professional situation, they may approach an agent or manager or lawyer of the composer. And they, in my experience, they don't tend to have a sort of a vague, gee, we'd like a piece from you and we're not sure when and we're not sure what and we're not sure who. In my own experience, it tends to be, we have a plan. It's really exciting. We'd like you to consider it, although it doesn't have to be that way. But the ask, in my own observation, most of the time comes after a lot of thought and planning and then sort of a target. The negotiation is, that can really vary. Often there's a financial plan in place, and often the composer will want more, and so there is a negotiation. Things like, as we'll get into in more detail, when the work has to be composed and delivered, always the subject of a conversation, because composers have other obligations much of the time, and so the negotiation is something that will be more clear as we look at a couple of sample agreements, because they're sort of an outline of the topics that people want to discuss. The agreement itself is the written agreement for the commission, which is the thing that we're going to dive into a bit today. And please don't forget the results. Commissions are really exciting. They're very much publicity beasts. Commissions are very much about announcing it, getting everyone excited, having a plan, being part of the portfolio of the organization, like we're commissioning these amazing things, and everyone's very excited. And then the premiere comes, and okay, let's just hope that everyone absolutely loves it. We may never find out, because even if they don't, I don't think most people will want to say they didn't love a commission that was 5 years in the planning. But it's you know, the wonderful thing about a commission is you make all these plans and then you get what you get. And I've heard some very funny stories over the years, you know, like the 10-minute piece that was an hour and a half. That's a true story. You know, stuff like that. So keep it in mind. All right, key aspects. You know, who the orchestra is, obviously, that and you know, what composer they're aiming at. And by the way, in case you're wondering, not all commission offers are accepted. You know, there may be a situation where a composer is too busy, or, you know, for some reason wants to do some other commission or whatever. So it's not always a foregone conclusion that it works out. Publisher, third item, excuse me a second. This is very interesting to many of you, because, you know, if it's Igor Stravinsky, he has a publisher, and the publisher will eventually own the work. The publisher needs to agree to the terms of the commission, in terms of, you know, how long can the Boston Symphony exclusively perform the Symphony of Psalms. The publisher has to be on board with the deadlines for the delivery of the performing materials. In today's world, okay, some people have publishers, some people are self-published, and one of the more interesting aspects I'm seeing now in commissions generally is there are more composers than the major publishers can publish. I mean, just, it's almost like, you know, you can't get a camel through the eye of a needle, or however you want to describe it. And many commissions are with composers or creative teams that are self-published. And what this means is, realistically, there has to be some kind of a plan for publishing, even if the composer is not that experienced in it. And sometimes some of the more interesting things that I get involved in are, I would call it publishing coaching. Very important where there are collaborations and more than one creative person, because, you know, if two people create an opera, for example, it's more difficult to get that opera into the marketplace if there's not a cohesive source, one publisher. If there's two self-published artists, it gets a little more complex. Type of work, the duration and instrumentation, whether there's a dramatic or other theme involved. You know, there's been pieces written for the opening of a concert hall or the construction of a concert hall. It's almost unending what those variations can be. The delivery is a huge thing, of course. When is it due? And this is where all the stress comes. You know, many of you are composers. I know for a fact, I can't see you, but you're all smiling and grinning and breaking out in a cold sweat just at the very word delivery on the screen. Okay, I know who you are. It's fine. The fee. So very interesting topic. You know, orchestras sometimes, or ensembles. I keep using the word orchestra. This is an ACO session. We're all well aware this can apply to a string quartet commission or anything else, I hope. So the fee is an interesting thing, how you determine that, what composers should charge, what they charged last time, all those factors. And that is without doubt one of the things in my own experience my clients look to me for, because I do more commissions than any single composer would. And so I've seen more agreements and I'm aware of more fee structures. And very often that's a very important part of the conversation, to be able to talk to someone who has seen lots of these. Production costs, very, you know, this has changed over the years. Probably many of you do your own scores and extract your own parts. Not all of you, but I'll bet a bunch of you do. It used to be different. It used to be that there were professional copyists and hefty invoices for that. It's still the case, depending on the scenario, but it's a I will tell you that when I was a publisher, as Melissa mentioned, I worked for European American Music, Shot and Universal Edition for 10 years before I went to law school. And in those days, it was, a question of using copyists. So it was a little more complicated than now with the digital software engraving programs. But the single most reliable area of stress, confusion, catastrophe, and we're out of money and the piece isn't copied yet was always the cost of doing that. And it still looms its head fairly large. The exclusivity, exclusive rights. So typically when an organization commissions a work, they absolutely, well, not typically, without question, want the world premiere. What is a little more open to a conversation is how long they can be the only organization that can perform the work. And that's the exclusive rights. And that is the main hallmark of consortiums, okay? Just, think of it logically. Work for one orchestra, premiere date, the orchestra may want to be the only ones to perform it for at least 1 year, which realistically, often that doesn't happen. I mean, if they premiere work in November and they have a summer season, okay, maybe they'll do it again within a year, although summer seasons are often lighter fare than brand new contemporary works. So it's an interesting point, but where it gets complicated is consortiums, because then now you have 5 orchestras and they may be each wanting to give their premiere over the next 3 seasons. Now the composer and publisher are looking at their work being limited to this group of 4 or 5 for maybe a couple years, maybe more. It's good and bad news. I mean, the great news is you've got 4 or 5 runs of performances by the co-commissioners. That's wonderful. The bad news is that if it's a hit, or at least in demand, hit in demand, it's contemporary music, but we'll use the words, that you have to tell other orchestras no until that period of time is gone, used up. Huge topic. The very last one here is media rights. So it was a growing trend before COVID, and COVID established conclusively that the entire world of classical music is inalterably changed in terms of everyone wants to live stream performances and maybe make them available as on-demand streams. This is the new normal that everyone wants. During COVID, this was how people stayed in touch with their subscriber base. And the entire industry has gone through a reevaluation of what type of media rights people need when they perform works. And the answer is they all want video online streaming of the live performance, and they all want, if they can get it, on-demand streaming that then continues later. So this has actually emerged as maybe the single most, not exactly fought over, but considered point in a commission these days is the media rights, because how media has become such an integral part of the business. And I had to put demonstration recording AFM ? Because this is an issue. If it's a union AFM orchestra, there are certain parameters in terms of even getting a demo for the composer, or certainly video streaming it has tremendous extra costs sometimes. So again, these are all the sort of things that you might not have thought about, but are part of today's modern commission agreement. So I'm going to now put up on the screen a basic, what I call short form commission agreement. And give me a moment, I have to stop share and then call up the other document and then reshare. And let's see if I can pull this off here. Back to Zoom.
We believe in you, Corey.
Honestly, this is, like all the stuff I'm talking about. In today's world, it's media streaming rights. In today's world, it's like, you better have your Zoom chops, buddy. Okay. So can you see a commission agreement form yet?
Absolutely. It looks great. And if you have the option to make it a little bigger, that might help the viewer as well, but it's pretty good.
There you go.
Yeah, that looks
So
great.
here, look, this is where I'm very cautious. I know this isn't law school, and I don't want to overwhelm people. I just want to give you kind of a brief tour of a couple highlights of a legal document from my perspective. And I'm going to do this as sort of, nonchalantly and not spending too much time on it as I possibly can. As you can tell from the conversation, well, it's not a conversation, it's a lecture. I look forward to having a conversation. Again, if we were live, you could, wave your arm and say, stop, 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 I got a question, but we'll leave plenty of time. So this is a really basic, simple commission document. It says, we have an agreement here, and there's a composer, a commissioner over here, and then there's the composer, and then there's their publisher. And of course, if the composer is self-published, the identity of the publisher might just be the composer. As many of you know, if you're a member of ASCAP or BMI, you join as a writer, as a composer. And they also give you the option of joining as your own publisher, and you give it some weird name, like Gracie Dog Press or whatever it is you want to give it. And you then are your own publisher. And so in an agreement like this, if it was Jane Smith, composer, and her publishing company at ASCAP was called Gracie Dog Publishing, then that would be the other party, even if it is the same person. The commissioner may want to be sure that they're dealing with everybody they need to deal with. Or, if there really isn't, if you really aren't publishing yourself in that sort of formal way, you can just say it's a deal between me and you and there's no publisher. You can do that. So, the commission, the first thing, original work with a particular instrumentation with a duration, with a provisional title or not. Okay, very simple. Premiere, when you're going to play it, it's going to be presented by the following artist on such and such a date at such and such a place. It's premiere. It's like the work and the premiere. This one's really interesting. This is obviously fairly recent. This one says scheduling and COVID-19 alternatives. You're up to the minute, folks. This is like the new reality. It's like, hey, if everyone gets COVID or we have to shut down or whatever, we're off the hook here, or we change our plan. Delivery, this is where you can get nervous again. This particular one wanted a PDF score and parts by a particular date called the performing materials. I mean, as you can tell, this is not rocket science, okay? Inscription, very, very important. This is the, for the glory of God and in the 50th anniversary of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. This is, it's always very important because commissions are partly about the honor and the glory. The commission fee. Here it is. They say what it is. This one says half upon full execution, meaning signature, and half upon delivery of the performing materials. Typical thing with opera is way more complicated, and we'll look at that in a moment. Exclusivity. Again, basics. Commissioner can exclusive right to present the premiere and perform it for 1 year thereafter without payment of a rental fee. So the standard with commissions is that if they pay for the work to be created, they don't want to pay a rental fee when they perform it during the exclusivity period. This is the standard. There would, of course, be the PRO revenue from the performance. And I don't know if this one mentions it. Usually it says that, all your performances have to be licensed by ASCAP or BMI or whatever the performing rights organization is. In consortiums, the question of rental fees for subsequent performances looms much larger, okay? So we'll get to that in a moment. Here's the media rights. Commissioner shall have the exclusive right to create an audiovisual recording of the world premiere for live streaming and for demand streaming worldwide. This one says in perpetuity. I must have written this for my client because good luck with many publishers. They're not going to give you perpetuity. They'll probably give you some months, maybe a year or more. An individual composer might give an organization perpetuity because, this may or may not be entirely clear to people. If you have a established publishing house relationship, in many cases, that publisher owns the copyright. It's no longer your copyright. In exchange, you get the royalty. So it's a deal that many composers make. please we're not talking today about publishing agreements. So, don't get your head into never give up your copyright. That's not the topic today. So there you go. There's the audiovisual stream forever. Yeah, I must have written this one. Okay. First commercial recording, very common, is that the commissioner wants the right to do the first commercial recording. And there's some details, a 6-month right to commercially release it. And if they don't, they have the non-exclusive right to make a recording. Copyright, this is just a reminder that the publisher or the composer owns the copyright in their work. There have been commissions where the commissioner has wanted to actually own the work created. That's just not the classical music. In film music, yeah, absolutely. In most cases, that is the standard. Not in classical music. Another topic for another day. Publicity, yeah, cooperate. Reps and okay, this is now called boilerplate. If you're making if it's 1880 and you're making a locomotive, it has a boiler in front that creates the steam to power the train, and it's constructed from metal plates, all of which are identical. For reasons I do not know, contracts, when they have terms that are the same in many contracts, they use that phrase, it's boilerplate. There you go. That was more of a law school comment. You guys don't care about that at all. That's fine. So the boilerplate stuff is, everybody promises that they can enter into this. What would be an example? I guess a composer signing this who has a publisher and doesn't tell the orchestra, that would be like, hey, you don't actually have the right to, give away exclusivity. Your publisher has to do that. I guess that could happen. Force majeure is a little different from COVID, but it's more about, tornadoes or shutting down everything. Assignment, if someone commissions you, you can't then say, well, I'm not going to actually write this piece. I'm going to have my friend Sally write this piece instead. You can't do that. You can't assign your rights. You're not an employee in the average commission. This is more of a tax thing. It's a freelance contractor with, if it's $1,000, they give you $1,000 and you have to pay your own taxes on that. And then miscellaneous is usually like what state the law is and everything else. So that's a really simple commission agreement. And then let me just go back and see where I am on my PowerPoint for just a second. Okay, so we did this example and it's loading. Okay, there we go. Okay, now let's get into the topic of consortiums. And I'm minding the time, by the way. It's 5 after, so we're in decent shape. So in a consortium, and this is definitely a trend. What are the reasons that there's going to be a consortium? One, it makes a glorious thing even more glorious. I mean, how exciting is it that someone's being commissioned by not 1, but 2 orchestras or 3? I mean, it's amazing and wonderful. It also helps the commissioners share the costs, although on the other hand, it also increases their obligations. It's great to say the commission fee is now split between 3 or 4 orchestras, but now you have 3 or 4 orchestras that have to program it, rehearse it, present it, advertise it. So those are some of the factors. It usually is, my observation is consortiums happen when everyone's like really pleased with the plan. They're really pleased with the group of orchestras. Maybe they're all, the same level orchestra regionally or whatever, or maybe they're all the major orchestras, or it's a composer that everyone's very excited about. And look at Ellen Reed. She's a very popular composer, and so several orchestras now get to promote, saying we have an Ellen Reed piece. So there's that kind of publicity boost that comes along. And the issues I've already mentioned. The exclusivity gets kind of weird because everybody has to have there's usually a lead commissioner does the world premiere, and then the co-commissioners, they may or may not specify when their premieres happen. in my experience, it's never within a month or two. It's always spills over into another season. It's just, you know, the nature of orchestral programming is very long term. It's years in advance. So do co-commissioners pay rental fees? So, you know, let me give you an example. A composer is going to be commissioned for $20,000 to write an orchestral piece. And then here's that there's 3 more orchestras going to play it. Okay, well, that's great. But then, you know, don't most human beings then think to themselves, okay, well, shouldn't I now have 4 times 20,000? Shouldn't it be 80,000 now that there's 4 commissioners? So that's the conversation that happens. And usually, you know, one of the big incentives for the orchestras is their cost sharing. So if it's a $20,000 commission, now all of a sudden, instead of the lead commissioner paying 20, each of the 4 are paying 5 each. I'm really simplifying this. I know I'm simplifying it, but you get the point. And so in my experience, what often happens is, okay, now there's 4 orchestras, great. Now there's going to be 4 performances and I'll get 4 ASCAP or BMI payments, great. But golly, you know, I'm still doing that for 20,000. They're saving money and I don't make any more. What if the co-commissioners paid rental fees? And that's a really common, you know, negotiated point. That may allow the orchestras to save money for each of them and their share of the commission fee by doing a rental fee, which, you know, is part of the reality for playing copyrighted music. There's a rental fee. Not every orchestra administrator would agree with that statement, but you know, that's kind of how the composer side might see it. And I just want to make it clear to you, I represent a lot of orchestras and a lot of composers, never in the same transaction, but I want to make it clear I'm not necessarily taking sides in this presentation. Cost sharing, I mentioned. The benefits to the composer, I mentioned the extra performances and PRO income and massive publicity. Payment logistics. So this is a commission agreement for a consortium. And right away, me as a lawyer, I'm looking at this and going, oh boy, because you can't really see it here because I deleted who the players are. But it says the commissioning organizations. Do you see that S there? Sorry. You know, organizations, it's like, what? And then, you know, one of them is lead commissioner. And then look over here on the left, it says, and. So this was a four orchestra commission, this particular one. And what I'm going to do is very briefly show you that document. Again, I am minding the time. I'm bringing up on my screen this consortium commission, and now I will do the screen share for that. So I'm going to hit share screen and pick the right one and share, and this will take a moment to load for you. There, it should be up. So this is that same, you know, and parties. Now this one, so look how this is a little more sophisticated. This was, you know, fairly sophisticated leading orchestras. And so, you know, they specified the instrumentation, you know, specified it's a work for orchestra of about 8 minutes for the musicians of the co-commissioner organizations. Then they covered the world premiere. You've already seen, you know, how that works. And then it says, now we're into co-commission land. Regional premiere performances will be scheduled following the world premiere and in the blah, blah season. And so look, where it says year here, this was actually 2 subsequent seasons being described. And this is part of the reality of this particular one. The orchestras weren't able or willing or whatever the situation was to, you know, all premiere it within a month, which the composer might have preferred. So this one, you know, was not ideal, but is very illustrative of how difficult a consortium can get just in terms of contracts, because the orchestras in the consortium didn't want to collectively have someone holding the purse and making the payments from one source. They needed to make separate payments. And this, you know, I can't say that I'm thrilled with this or recommend it. I think it was complicated for everybody, for the orchestras and the composer. But this is how it looks in a contract. First payment, 1, 2, 3 by the different consortium members. Second payment, 1, 2, 3, 6 payments from 3, 2 each from 3 different organizations is complicated. But as a reality in that particular event, that's what needed to happen. And then for the preparation of scores and performance materials, there also were 3 separate payments. Again, not ideal, but the orchestras needed that and we made it work.
Would holding those funds in escrow be an alternative to this to streamline things for the composer?
Thank you. So Melissa's question is, shouldn't one of them hold the money or some central place, a third party hold it and make single payments? Well, yes, that's definitely easier for the recipient and probably for the orchestras. It's a matter of orchestral organization, taste, how they do their accounting. Orchestras are separate nonprofit corporations. They have preferences and needs, so to speak. But yes, that's certainly an option, and it would have avoided some of this. But for now, I'm not criticizing it because it all worked beautifully. It's just a reality of my presentation today is what these agreements look like. So then, by the way, there's stuff about the, these are larger orchestras. They really specified scores and trim size. They have a real librarian and they spelled it all out. There's the media rights. I'm going to move on now because that media rights are part of the conversation. And let's go back to the main presentation for now. I see a lot of things in chat, one thing in Q&A. So again, I'm mindful of the time and I want to wrap up my presentation and focus on that. So let's see here. I will now, let's see, okay, share screen and go to a new one. And you should shortly be back at the PowerPoint. Okay. There we are. So collaborations, and I'm going to just give you a short summary of this. I believe you have the materials, and I apologize for that, but it's going to be more, this is now getting more into the opera field, but I want you to be aware of this, and then I'm going to switch to Q&A in just a couple minutes. So typically it is a composer and a librettist, and ideally they have an agreement between themselves about, what happens if one of us gets sick? How are we sharing the commission fee? How are we sharing downstream income? What is the publishing situation? What I see sometimes is the composer says, I will be the publisher, and the librettist says, go ahead, because I'm a librettist. I don't know anything about music publishing, you do it. And they agree to a sharing of revenue. The librettist may be asked to convey their copyright to a publisher. All of those things are very important in the collaboration. And my real message to you is that it's very important to avoid a situation, which I have encountered, where an opera house says, we want to do your opera, but the composer and the librettist have each individually retained their rights, and they can't agree, and therefore we can't reach a license agreement, and we will not perform the opera. And to me, that is tragic, and it has happened. So it's very important, just keep in mind for purposes of today, that there has to be a collaboration agreement ideally, and all of this has to be laid out. In an opera commission, I'm just going to briefly talk about, many of the aspects are the same, except for the delivery. You do have something much more complicated where first the librettist delivers, and then the composer delivers, and then there's a vocal score. And I'll just show you real briefly for literally a minute how that might look. Just give me a moment. Opera commission agreement. Just so you have a sense of how this looks on paper if you ever are fortunate enough to be involved in an opera commission. Let's see, I want to be here and I want to share screen. And as I'm wrapping this up, okay, it's going to be opera commission agreement share, and it's loading. Okay, so you should now be seeing the opera commission agreement. We're all good, we can see it. Okay, so here's really all I want you to see is that the delivery. Look at this. This is very, very typical, and there's a lot here, okay? First, in this particular opera commission, there was first a libretto outline, then an Act One libretto, and there were, review and approvals along the way. Act Two completed libretto. Then, of course, once the libretto's done, the composer can do a piano vocal score, Act One, date. And then private or public reading workshop of Act One, date. Act Two vocal score, private or public reading of Act Two piano vocal score. And then, comes the full score and orchestral parts. And then a private, this one had a lot of workshops. Opera is amazing. When they can, they workshop stuff. Can you imagine? You get to hear it sung with a piano score and you get to make revisions. I think it's so wonderful that opera companies, when they have the budget, offer that revised full score. They acknowledge there may be revisions. This is like a dream commission, honestly. Rehearsals and premiere. That's the main thing I wanted to highlight is with collaborations is the importance of figuring out the future publishing and the complications of delivery when you have both a libretto and a score. And one of the biggest things, last comment on this, is the composer and librettist deciding the split. Is it half and half, which would be a Broadway model? In opera, it happens, but it's more common that because the librettist can do their work in 4 months and the composer might need 4 years, very often the composer gets more like 70 to 30 or something like that. Okay, so I think now let's see where we are. Okay, we have 11 minutes. Melissa, would you like to moderate? I haven't looked at the Q&A or chat.
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy to. And just as we're closing off the conversation on opera consortium or opera commissions, I'm curious if in your experience, you've seen any differences in the model of what rights or what copyright might be assigned into whom in that particular circumstance, because these are situations where these commissions happen over a long period of time with, $250,000, $500,000 investments from opera companies. And there can be situations where some aspects of the idea or the work or something can be held by the company, at least from what I hear.
You mean the underlying rights?
Could be. I'm curious what might be in the range of typical as opposed to concert works where the composer actually holds everything, if that makes sense.
Right. So the first question is whether there's underlying rights. The opera is based on something, a book or a film. And these days, honest to gosh, my clients, some very proactive opera companies, they're out there looking for something great to offer their audience, and they're then in that sort of backroom phase of the project. They're deciding what would be great and who the perfect composers might be. What I'm seeing in the past few years is it might be a novel that's set regionally near them by a leading Pulitzer Prize winning author. And it's like, wow, this is the famous novel from our state. Let's see if, Corey can get us the rights. And then they go out and find the composer and librettist. Films are really popular to adapt. I've worked on very complicated film things like The Shining. That was Warner Brothers and Stanley Kubrick's estate, and Stephen King. That was complex, but worked. And so, yeah, there are those underlying rights, which are part of the triumvirate. This gets a little closer to Broadway where it's book, music, lyrics. And so in today's opera world, it's very often underlying book or film, composer and librettist. So yeah, again, opera is a little more complicated.
Yeah.
Aspect. Okay.
That's extremely helpful. And it relates to one of the questions that is here, which is we have someone, Jan, who is saying, I write pieces setting texts from children's stories for narrator and orchestra. I'm negotiating with a small press as I need to publish the score with ACA, American Composers Edition. In working out the licensing with the small press for the rights to use the text in the published composition, what would the language be for the length of the license, and what portion should the press get on the sales of the scores?
Okay, so this is the free lawyer part that I mentioned, but I'm going to keep it brief because I want to answer as many questions as I can. And thank you for that great question, and congratulations on this project. Narrator and orchestra works get performed a ton. I've involved in a bunch of these exact questions. So here's the traditional old school thing was it was fairly easy to get rights forever, which is what you traditionally need. We're going to publish it, we may record it, We may, synchronize it in a film, and we just got to have all those rights forever. And we'll, in exchange, we'll either give you a big or a lump sum now or a percentage of revenue in the future. And that's ideal. Otherwise, think about it. At some point, you got to stop exploiting your work if you don't have it forever. So that's a pretty key point to me. The thought of anybody creating a work that they have to stop using because their license stops is unacceptable, I think, to most people. Then in terms of the percentage, okay, who knows? 10%, 20, 25. I think, in some cases, they may say, well, we're a collaboration like Lennon and McCartney, it's 50-50. That's a little hard to swallow, I think. But there you go. There's just some random thoughts, and thank you for the question.
Yes, of course. And I think we have Marina with us. Marina, welcome.
Yes, hello. Okay, I have a couple of questions. It's basically 3 questions, and a couple of them are pretty simple. The first one is there a place where one, as like a freelance, fairly new composer, can go to find legal help in like when you're actually going through this whole thing? A place to find a lawyer that isn't too expensive? We're just finding out. Or is there a sort of union or representation that can help composers? Because as an individual going against like a big company, sometimes like the power balance is a little bit off.
Right. Right. So thank you. I'm gonna respond to that again in the interest of time. Yeah, someone just put on the screen exactly what I was about to say. Thank you, Fred Miller.
Thank you so much.
So in some of the I don't know where you're located, Marina. Where are you geographically?
In Pittsburgh.
Okay. I know that in Philadelphia they have a volunteer lawyers for the arts. Don't know about Pittsburgh. New York has it, LA, some of the larger cities. And they're organizations that provide pro bono lawyers, although the lawyers may not have the expertise you need. It's, like when I started out as a lawyer, I did a lot of this because it gave me wonderful experience, and I worked for free, but I knew what I was doing. So check out VLA, there's income requirements, and it's at least a start. Publishers, if you are lucky enough to have a publisher, they very often can handle all this themselves. They know this world, they do it every day. And very often a good publisher means you don't actually need a lawyer. And I apologize, but I think I'd like to get in as many questions as we possibly can.
Yep. Thank you so much for that. And I want to just ask one of my own before I come to some of these others. You've given us a lot of deal points to think about in a commission agreement. And a lot of times people think that what they're commissioning or what they're negotiating is the fee, but there are actually a lot of things that you can create value for yourself in addition to the fee that might counterbalance things like repeat performances of the work, recording, other things. I wonder if you can talk about how some of that tends to happen in conversation and what people should be thinking about when it comes to other ways to create value for yourself and make money, in fact, in how a commission agreement is set up.
Well, very often, part of this calculation is that unknown of whether the piece will be in demand, because, it's easier to give up to take a smaller fee if you can make the exclusivity much shorter, because, let's say, here's an obvious example of that. You take a much lower fee than you want, but you tell them you do the premiere and then we're done. There, no year after that. And if you're confident enough, if you're a composer thinking, okay, I've got a piece for, narrator and orchestra perfect for children's concerts that I'm sure I can get performances of, then your upside then is you've cut the exclusivity period in order to get the piece out into the market. That's one obvious example. Yeah, I think, why don't we make that an example so we can take more questions for now?
I think that's exactly right. And then another question here, we've talked about works that engage with text and other previously existing things. What about a work that engages with previous musical material? So for instance, if someone wants to create a derivative work based on Rossini, is there a difference in how they might negotiate the fee versus how they negotiate that for a completely original composition? This is a question from Fred.
Okay. Well, basing something on existing material doesn't necessarily make the commission fee lower. If that is that sort of your question? Let's go back to Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms, okay? He based it on pre-existing material, I think a psalm from the Bible, and I don't think there was a chance that Stravinsky took a lower fee because he was adapting public domain text, or even if it was, I mean, to me, it's always about the market price of the composer, and that never goes down. That, the composer or their publisher or their lawyer is always pushing that up based on demand. So no, I don't think that's a quid pro quo. It's you want a piece from Ellen Reed, it's going to be a wonderful opportunity, and you shouldn't pay her less if she's using some text in that piece.
Yeah, that's a super great answer. And one of the things that I want to share too is we come back to the question of consortia and exclusivity. Is like a lot of organizations will want to hold on to those because they want to have that for a period of time, might be advantageous. There are also others like ACO that don't want that at all. Like, I want your work to get out there with other orchestras as quickly as possible, and I want consortia to happen. So there's a question here about timing. This is from Ron. If a composer wants to bring additional ensembles to expand a consortium agreement, but the contract with orchestra number one has already been negotiated, is there a way to add orchestras and fees at that point in time?
Yeah, this has come up, and I will tell you that orchestras take their commissions pretty seriously. Like, this is a major statement by us. It's major important. We've put it together. They're not generally keen on someone saying, oh, I want to bring in this other group, for all those reasons. I've seen a situation where an orchestra said, well, we commissioned the composer and we had the exclusive and we're paying a lot, and it's for everyone's glory. And then the composer said that they had arranged it for band and it was being played by a band somewhere, and the orchestra wasn't happy. So I think this is, this goes to the very heart of why commissions happen. They happen for glory and the arts, and part of the glory is the Boston Symphony has its name on Symphony of Psalms. My God, how important and valuable was that to them, and still is today. So I think if Stravinsky had said, oh, I want to arrange it for band and we're doing it in Florida, I don't think they would have been very pleased. So I think it's a challenge to do what you're talking about.
Yeah, could definitely be a challenge. I will say I've been involved in a couple of situations like that. And it happened where, one peer orchestra might say to another, we'd love to join this. Would you be open to that? It's definitely a soft ask kind of question for all of the reasons that you described.
Look,
so that's
work.
extremely helpful.
It can work, but it will have to be, carefully done. But yes, it can work, Fred.
Yeah.
To give you a positive outcome.
Absolutely. And then there's a question here about how composers and lyricists negotiate rights, so copyright media for new choral works. Is there a standard in this arena, especially when it's new text specifically for the commission?
Yeah, this is a similar thing to the opera. In pop songs, it's 50-50. It's like composer and lyricist. And in my experience, where the lyricist is famous, they can negotiate for 50-50 on a project like that. There's sort of a tradition of the composer in classical music being more famous and more in demand and doing more work. Realistically, I would say there's probably more work in writing, 10 minutes of choral music than in 10 minutes of choral music words. But I don't want to offend any poets or librettists in the audience. And I represent some librettists. So, I'd say it's kind of a question of what seems reasonable, but in classical music, with exceptions, it's not usually 50-50. The composer usually has a larger percentage, but there are exceptions. Especially, there are operas where the librettist is the star. I mean, that's the reality today.
Yeah, that's extremely helpful. And I'm curious, there's one last question here that is on composer, agent, and manager relationships, how a composer finds someone to help market their skills and art, and what composers, agents, or managers might do, and also what is typical in terms of agreement percentages.
Okay. By the way, we're over the hour. Are
Yep.
we on?
We're just kidding. This is the last one, so we're good after
I'm
this.
fine with it. I just didn't want, I want to make sure that we're okay in terms of logistics. Okay, so the publisher is traditionally also like an agent and a promoter and finds opportunities, and in exchange for that takes the publisher's share of the income. There is, however, there are representatives for composers, management, agents even, and they traditionally perform, services that maybe a publisher won't do, like networking, looking for opportunities in ways perhaps some publishers can't or won't. And so that means the composer is now starting to put together a team. They may or may not have a publisher, but they will have an agent and a representative. And it also may involve performing. If a composer is also a conductor, then an agency that books performing gigs also can perform that function. Agents and managers, they are different legally, no time to go into it. They take commissions often in the range of 10, 15, or 20%, sometimes higher depending on what they do. But that's kind of the ballpark there. And in terms of finding one, the best way to find one is to be in demand and making money, because then they know that as a business proposition, it'll be worth their time. It's hard to find the dream agent who will discover you, work for free to make you a star. That is, that does happen, but wow, that's hard. It's much easier if you're in demand. They may say, hey, I think I can grow what you've already planted.
That's a beautiful answer. I once had someone tell me a manager will not do for you, or an agent will not do for you what you have not already proven you can do for yourself. So that was a really fascinating thought.
These are all businesses, and
Mhm.
ultimately, agents and managers need to earn a living, and so they will gravitate to the money. And that's not a pejorative comment. I represent agents and managers. It's reality. It's like publishing is a business. Publishers tend to take on composers who are earning money.
Absolutely. Well, Corey, you are a light in the dark. We greatly appreciate you. And for those who have for those who have further questions for Corey or want to dig into media rights even more, we have another session that will be coming up in a few weeks around that topic in specific. So we will have a chance to dig into that even more. But Corey, for the moment, thank you so much for today. We greatly
Everybody.
appreciate you.
Thank you, everybody.
And I want to thank you, Corey. And I want to welcome Garrett back to the screen to close us out for today.
Yes, thank you, Corey. Thank you, Melissa. And thank you to each and every one of you for attending today's session. Your feedback plays a big role in the formation of our future webinars and workshops. So if you're able, please use the link that I put in the chat to complete a very short survey. We'd also love to welcome you back next week on Tuesday, not Wednesday, on Tuesday, March 7th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern for our fundraising and grants workshop titled Rights and Wrong, featuring Yolanda F. Johnson. We're extremely excited to present that next week. Another huge thanks to our Earshot partners, the American Composers Forum, New Music USA, and the League of American Orchestras. We're very grateful to the many individuals and organizations who have made Earshot possible through their support, and to ACO's artists, staff, and board for making this program a reality. For more information on Earshot, including how you can apply as a composer or connect with us to bring the program to your own orchestra, as well as a full list of our supporters, visit us at americancomposers.org. Special thanks for our Earshot funders, the Altman Foundation, Elizabeth and Justice Schlichting, Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Sphinx Venture Fund, TD Charitable Foundation, the Fromm Foundation, the Aaron Copland Fund for Music, Alice M. Ditson Fund of Columbia University, and the League of American Orchestras, with support from the Virginia B. Toolman Foundation. Also, a special thanks to the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, New York State Council on the Arts with the support of Governor Kathy Hochul and the New York State Legislature, and the National Endowment for the Arts. I hope that each and every one of you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.